In the late 1920s, cinema took one step closer to full immersion. That step with the introduction of speech. This allowed for screenplays to feel much more like plays, since now a character could express themselves through dialogue. But some would argue that this was a step back, because it meant that there was less emphasis placed on expressing a character through their actions and their environment. And some more people would even argue that this negates the entire point of a visual storytelling medium. But 50 years later, this new dimension would be discarded, and when it was, it created the greatest story ever told. Adapted from the popular manga, Pingu has become a worldwide phenomenon, and yet it is hard to find anyone who has a proper understanding of the Pingu lore. Thus, this video is designed to give you a proper rundown of the Pingu timeline. I would also recommend reading the 200-hour visual novel that started it all, Fate Stay Newt, and I even did a reading of it on Audible, which I have an extract of here. Pingu approached their newly summoned noble phantasm, aware that at this moment the other mages were doing the same. "What do you wish I do, master?" asked Saber, bowing behind their sword. "Replied Pingu. Now, if we are going to be using the anime adaptations as reference points, then this will look slightly daunting, but this is the result of Studio Gainax wanting to adapt the most iconic arc of Pingu, the post-nuclear arc, but also wanting to have new audiences engage with the Pingu franchise, thus the slightly slapdash inclusion of some moments from the introduction arc. When asked about this, mangaka Otaru Gyutoman stated, "You see, I wasn't sure how successful this was going to be, and thus I wanted to adapt at least my favourite part of the series. When I envisioned Pingu, try as I must, my mind always springs to the post-nuclear arc. I still wanted newcomers to understand and sympathise with these characters before putting them through these psychological trials. Not like Postman Pat. Those fuckers didn't introduce how he got that black and white cat. Fuck Postman Pat, man. Kids shit, honestly." However, we do have the starting point with the Pingu Looks After the Egg episode, as well as the episodes in which Pinga, Robbie and Pingy are introduced. These episodes establish the world's power system in possibly the best way anime has ever done. We see Pingu is gradually learning new moves, but is struggling, as seen by this subtle movement after his head separates from his body. And on top of this, Pingu is not powerful enough to defeat a fetus, a power level which will seem trivial to those who know what will happen in later arcs. The episode Pingu Goes Fishing would up the ante with its Pingu vs Robbie fight, a fight that I find comparable to the Giorno vs Bucciarati fight, as it involved the two enemies joining forces at the end, proved that one could only win if they had a strategy behind them, and of course, featured the best tongue animation of its respective decade. And while the skip to Pingy's introduction might seem like a drastic jump that makes things needlessly confusing, the truth is that the introduction episode for Pingy shows not only that Pingu is at the stage where he has to run from fights, but also that he is a simp. Now that we have that background, it is worth analysing the training arc, with Studio Trigger taking the reins for the adaptation. It meant that the perfect studio had been chosen to show Pingu's honing of the crafts that would become so essential in the next arc. We see Pingu becoming smarter with their tactics, as well as their ability to put up more of a fight. But this is also where we see the start of Pingu's reality-breaking abilities. You see, in the OVA series that serves as the buffer between this and the City arc, dubbed the quote-unquote Pingu show, Pingu is seen to actively interact with a narrator, and at times subvert them, such as interrupting their penguin facts section by getting a CBeebies presenter to say the word breeding season.
Breeding season.
Now, some would say that this is at odds with the lack of reality-bending sequences seen in the City arc, but Otaru Gyutoman did have this to say. With this arc, what I wanted to focus on was Pingu training all aspects at once, from his general combat technique all the way to foreshadowing the metaphysical power he would have later. I mean, when's the last time you saw Postman Pat train comprehensively? That's right, bloody never. Pingu could deck Postman Pat any day of the week. Postman Pat's too scared to come out of his fucking van, coward. It is now we arrive at the City arc, where Penguin society is at the apex of its development, which prompts Pingu and his family to move to the big city so that Pingu can study new disciplines. His diligence in his studies of the new jobs allows him to assemble the Band of the Penguin and overcome their simp tendencies. Polygon Pictures should be commended for making the first anime that was ever nerfed because of how good it was, and something tells me that they aren't done yet, since there is at least another season's worth of that arc yet to adapt, if not an OVA made of the VTuber subplot. However, the great penguin decadence would collapse in on itself, as the story progressed into its most debated and yet unadapted arc. The Catastrophe arc is complicated, to say the least. This is an arc that hasn't been yet adapted into an anime, and this is because we have not invented the means by which we can animate this arc without all the animators resembling husks of human beings by the end. This is why Studio Mappa are rumoured to be taking on this project within the next decade. The reason why there is so much political theorisation around Pingu is largely due to this arc. Was it all an extension of the Second World War that caused this catastrophe? Perhaps a literal and figurative Cold War? Or maybe it was the war that is depicted in the upcoming game Battlefield 2042, as seen by Pingu's appearance here, completely unfazed by the havoc collapsing around him. In a way, I'm glad that we don't have the arc animated, because we are only left to imagine what horror occurred in the decimation of Penguin society. And this is a viewpoint that series creator Otaru Gyutoman agrees with, as they've gone on record saying, "Van driving ass, spectacle donning ass, post office working motherfucker. Where I'm from, we don't even need postmen. Just get our St. Bernard to run between sender and poster. This is why we don't get into any wars." Truly, he was a troubled soul. But now comes the moment where we can watch the rest of the original 4 seasons, as we have reached the post-nuclear arc. The first episode is arguably one of the best episodes in anime, period. Even down to the title itself. The title is Hello, Pingu. This comma is important, as it separates the 2 other words, turning the pronunciation from Hello Pingu into Hello Pingu? Nothing we recognise the same, but Pingu. And this is true for both the audience and Pingu himself, as proven by this scene where he looks into the mirror and says blah, 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 blah. When translated into English, this means fight. Fight. And this scene has inspired anime up until this very day. But the reality shattering comes back into effect, with Pingu now being able to see the future. At first, there is the simple omen of fear and death with this skull, but then there is the bit where Pingu imagines a land far away, free from war, where the harvests are plentiful, and yet still with the underpinning imagery of the war that has been, with Pingu drinking blood from the streams, as that is what he has left in his wake after his many battles. And the most clear of these visions comes with the walrus. While Pingu shrugs off some of the damage that would have previously been fatal, this strikes almost existential fear into him, because he knows what he's being warned of, the coming of the cataclysm, known as Cuckoo Gajube. This will end all life on Earth, or at least what's left of it, and Pingu knows that he is all that stands in the way of the destruction of not just this planet, but possibly all else as well. The rest is a bit scattershot, and were only really trialed in some of the test animations. Firstly, we have this one where Pingu has been able to manifest reality in such a way where he can find a real paint container and uses that to practice their ranged combat. There's this one where we see another vision of the walrus, and there's this final one where Pingu is seen battling one of the early emissaries of the great Cuckoo Gajube and being cast out into the ocean. No one knows what happens next, even the manga readers. Now, it is believed that this test footage that was part of a scrapped 2012 attempt at continuing the story almost entirely through rotoscoped animation serves as the key. And what's more interesting about it is that it features Pingu speaking. That is right. Pingu has become more powerful than you can imagine. He has become Australian. Perhaps this will signal the start of another training arc, or Pingu fighting the great Cuckoo Gajube. But no matter in the future, I hope you know the timeline as it now stands. Although you probably don't know this as well as the 2 housemates of mine who got this video's entire script recited at them while I was drunk a few days ago. And yes, this even included all the Otaru Gyutoman bits with the Postman Pat rant. This is not how I envisioned spending my adult years.